All right, today we're diving into the life of one of history's most complicated figures. A man celebrated as a hero, but also haunted by what he created. We're talking about the man who gave the world the atomic bomb.
That's the haunting line J. Robert Oppenheimer himself remembered thinking right after he saw the terrifying power he just unleashed. It's a moment that, no joke, changed him and the entire world forever.
So who was the man behind this world-ending weapon? Let's get into it. We're going to explore the story of a genius mind, a world tearing itself apart at war, and an invention that literally changed the course of humanity forever.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Oppenheimer was born back in 1904. His family was well-off German immigrants, and they really pushed his curiosity. And you have to remember the time he grew up in. It was this revolutionary era of invention. Think about it. Electric lights, the first cars. It was an amazing time for science, and he was right in the middle of it.
But here's the thing. For all his genius, Oppenheimer was also a deeply troubled person. I mean, he was brilliant, no doubt. He flew through his studies and got his PhD when he was only 23. But his time at university was, well, a roller coaster. He was wrestling with some serious depression, and at one point, he actually tried to poison his tutor with a drugged apple. It's a shocking moment that really shows you the kind of brilliant but incredibly fragile mind we're dealing with here.
So as we move into the 1930s, things in Europe start to get dark. A really dark shadow is falling across the continent. Oppenheimer and all of his colleagues in America are just watching in horror as Hitler's power grows. They can all see where this is headed: war.
And then in 1939, right as World War II is kicking off, some absolutely shocking news comes out of Germany. Their scientists had done what many thought was impossible. They had figured out how to split the atom. I mean, this sent total shockwaves through the scientific community. Even a mind like Albert Einstein had thought it was just theoretical stuff, but now it was very, very real.
So what is that exactly?
Well, that's nuclear fission. You split an atom's nucleus and it sets off this chain reaction that unleashes a colossal amount of energy. We're talking millions of times more powerful than any chemical reaction, like dynamite. Oppenheimer got it instantly. He knew what this meant. The terrifying implication was that the Nazis could use this to build a weapon of unbelievable destructive power.
And just like that, the race was on, a race to build the bomb. But what's fascinating is that this wasn't just about countries fighting. It became this personal rivalry between two of the greatest physicists alive. You had Oppenheimer leading the charge for the US, and over in Germany, you had Werner Heisenberg. And get this, they were actually former friends, classmates from their time in Germany. Now they were on opposite sides of a world war, locked in this high-stakes scientific duel.
Okay, so 1942. The war is in full swing. The US decides it has to act, and it launches this incredibly secret, incredibly high-stakes operation. You've probably heard of it, the Manhattan Project. The mission? It was simple and it was terrifying. Build an atomic bomb before the Germans do.
Now, who do you think they picked to lead the scientific side of this thing? You guessed it, Oppenheimer. And honestly, it was a pretty surprising choice. This guy had no major achievements to his name. He didn't even like doing experiments. But Army General Groves, the military guy in charge, he saw something special in Oppenheimer. He saw a unique kind of genius who could not only understand the insane complexity of the physics, but could also bring people together and lead them. So they needed a place to do this work, a place that was completely off the grid. And they built it. Literally, an entire secret city called Los Alamos popped up out of nowhere in the middle of the New Mexico desert. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and even their families moved there. They were all living in total secrecy, with one single terrifying mission: design and build a working atomic bomb. So, for years they struggled. They hit roadblock after roadblock. But finally, they came up with this really complex, kind of out-there design. It's called the implosion design. The idea was to take a small ball of plutonium, about the size of a baseball, and surround it with conventional explosives. Then, you detonate those explosives inward to crush the plutonium so intensely that its atoms are forced to split. This was the theory anyway. It was incredibly complicated, totally unproven, and it had to work.
All right, so by 1945, the situation has changed. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. The whole original reason for building the bomb, to beat the Nazis to it, is gone. But the project keeps going, full steam ahead, because the war with Japan is still raging. Oppenheimer's new hope, or maybe his justification, was that maybe just one demonstration of this weapon could be so terrible it would force an end to all wars forever.
And that brings us to July 16th, 1945. They're ready for the first test. It's out there in the desert, still dark. Oppenheimer is in a bunker, chain smoking, super tense. And some of the scientists had this very real, terrifying fear. What if the explosion was so powerful it set the Earth's atmosphere on fire and literally destroyed the whole planet? Seriously, nobody knew for sure if that would happen.
And then it happened. The test was a horrifying success. The blast was so bright it turned night into day. This terrifying mushroom cloud climbed up into the sky, and in that one moment, they all knew. The world would absolutely not be the same. Oppenheimer knew he'd done it. He had achieved the power to destroy worlds.
Just a few weeks later, with the test a success, President Truman gives the order. The first atomic bomb is going to be used in war. The target? The Japanese city of Hiroshima.
So on August 6th, the first bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, is dropped. The city of Hiroshima is just erased. In an instant, something like 120,000 people are dead. It's almost impossible to even imagine.
But even after that level of devastation, Japan didn't surrender. So, 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped, this time on the city of Nagasaki.
This one was called Fat Man. It killed around 80,000 more people. And that was finally enough. Japan surrendered unconditionally, and World War II came to an end.
So, the war is over, and Oppenheimer? He's a hero. He's celebrated as the man who ended the war. But while everyone else was celebrating, he was haunted. He knew the cost. He saw the blood on his hands. And from that point on, he spent the rest of his life trying to put the genie back in the bottle, trying to contain the monster he'd created. He started campaigning like crazy for international control of nuclear energy. He even met with President Truman and told him straight up, "I feel I have blood on my hands." But Truman was furious. He basically called him a crybaby and ignored his advice. And when Oppenheimer publicly opposed America's next big project, an even more powerful weapon, he was put on a collision course with the very government he'd helped.
See, when the Soviets tested their own A-bomb in 1949, the arms race was officially on. The US responded by deciding to build something even bigger, the hydrogen bomb, or H-bomb. And just look at the difference in power. We're talking about a weapon that's nearly 1,000 times more destructive. Oppenheimer's opposition to this new weapon made him some very, very powerful enemies.
And his enemies used his past against him. He was accused of being a communist sympathizer, a security risk. He was dragged through this humiliating security hearing where his own colleagues, people like Edward Teller, the guy who created the H-bomb, testified against him. In the end, the father of the atomic bomb was publicly broken. They stripped him of his security clearance and basically silenced him. Oppenheimer died in 1967, and his legacy is complicated. He had this hope that his weapon would create a peace so terrible it would end all war. But did it? Instead, it seems like he kicked off a whole new age of fear. He left behind a world that is forever changed, one that's constantly living under the shadow of the weapon he built and still wrestling with that terrifying question, what comes next?